Good morning, everybody. My name is Lloyd Stokes. This is the most recent episode of Sourced Presents, and actually will be the first recorded episode that we move on to our new podcast with more details to come. Source Presents is an interview series that we created about 18 months ago, and the reason for wanting to do it was the nature of our business working with early stage um, startup, scale up, predominantly SaaS and software companies, was that we were meeting a huge variety of people, both clients, candidates, networks, just VCs, the whole ecosystem, and people who were really early in their career, who were much later in their career, middle of their career, people who'd done career pivots, changes, so many interesting people. And what we wanted to do was to interview some of those people and get them to tell their story and talk about their journey and what they've done and how they started, where they've got to, and everything in between, and hopefully shine a light on some topics that are increasingly important in our world and in the ecosystem that we work in. So today I'm joined by Bazz Deans. Bazz is somebody that I've known for, well, actually, I remember this. Our first conversation was in COVID, and I think I had COVID, and I managed to land I'd managed to prospect Bazz and land a conversation with him, and I was so determined to make sure that I held up that meeting, that video call, that I did the call with COVID. Albeit, I will say that I didn't have COVID very badly, so I was pretty fortunate. But that was our first. I don't know if you remember that, Baz, but I definitely do. um, um, so yeah, over the last 4 years, we've got to know each other, and we'll come on to kind of where you are and what you're doing today, Baz. But yeah, I guess before we go any further, it would be great if you could just give us a little bit of an introduction to you.
Cool. Thank you so much for having me along, Lloyd. And what a cool 4 years it's been. I remember that conversation clearly. I remember the madness that we were in, but the fact you operated so well. So I loved it. Cool. But about me. So I'm a Kiwi. I've lived in the UK for 6 years. I have two wonderful children and an amazing wife. We live in Vauxhall. I'm hyper-adventurous and I love a bit of change. I love a bit of different experiences being thrown at me. Hence why I live in this wonderful part of the world.
I love that. Hyper-adventurous is, I'm going to come back to that one. I'm going to come back to that. Anyone who describes themselves as hyper-adventurous, there's a point there that we're going to delve into at some point. But the reason I wanted to get you on is I remember those first conversations. Your time at Shootster, we had some interactions, we did some work with you. I just, from the moment we had a conversation, just felt like you were a incredibly interesting, high energy, kind of super kind of just interesting, purposeful individual. And I know people who've worked with you who just testify to that as you. That really is you. And having met you a few times now, I can testify to that. The topic that we're going to really delve into today, when we get there, is the idea of coaching and how you now are a key part of an organization called Braver Leaders, who we'll delve into in a bit. But the Braver Leaders is a coaching business, and there's a reason why you've wanted to get into that business, and the reason why you're having such impact within that organization. Before we kind of get there, I always think it's good to just take it back a bit and look at your career, and not everything, but certainly the meaningful points in your journey so far, and just give a bit of context as to why you're doing what you're doing today, and where that idea and where you as a person and as a leader has come from yourself. So yeah, it'd be great if you could kind of like take us a little earlier on to I guess I always love to know where you started. So just let's go there, and then let's go to present day.
Cool. Look forward to it. Once I start rolling though, Lloyd, make sure you stop me because it might keep going. So
yeah, it's fine. It's all good.
Where do we start? So actually, it all began with an amazing conversation with a cousin who's a lot older than I. And this was back in the 90s. And God, I sound old, but I'm not really that old. We were discussing organizational psychology and the effect that has on large organizations that he worked with at the time, and actually in the Philippines and all sorts of wonderful places. And I was just fascinated. I was blown away by that combination of an innate understanding of people individually and collectively, mixed with, I guess, the elements of organizational design. And that really stimulated some, I guess, a passionate fire for this. And I always knew I loved people. I loved the energy in a room, and I'm a hyper extroverted person. I'm probably one of the most extroverted people on earth. And so I combined that and decided I'll do psychology and anthropology at university to understand both people individually and also collectively as society builders, and what is good and what isn't so good in those spaces. So I did that. After that, obviously, I got a little lost in terms of my purpose. I did all sorts of, got caught in the shiny ball syndrome of marketing agencies and advertising agencies. It was all fun and games, a lot of fun, a lot of play, but obviously a lot of hard work and a real fire and brimstone way to learn. So I did that. I learned about managing people and how not to manage people. I think I probably did the most, the latter. And then I obviously started refining my art a little bit and learning a bit more about corporates and commercial acumen and strategy and all that wonderful stuff. I decided to go corporate side and startup side and scale up side and all sorts of wonderful things in technology spaces with all that growth that happens in those arenas. Long story short, after doing all that, I fell upon Shootster, which is a video technology business. And that's really where I brought all of those learnings together. And I really started refining my leadership skills. And I specifically say leadership. So I really started to understand the innate, strengths of a strong leader, of my strength as a leader, not necessarily all, but just mine. And I really sort of loved that process of learning around high-performing teams and how to craft them. And that's finally how I got here, is that I was the founding client for Sam Harvey, my very good friend and the person who founded Braver Leaders. I brought him into the business. He and I co-created wonderful programs for the team in EMEA. And off the back of that, I am sitting right in front of you right now.
I love that. I love that. The idea that obviously there's that friendship, that connection there. And so that's always going to have a profound impact on that working relationship. But the fact that you used and accessed that service and then eventually decided, actually this is where I need to be. I know that looking through, and anyone who looks at your LinkedIn profile after this will be able to read, because you really clearly documented between Shootster and Braver Leaders, you also had a break, a career break, and lots happened in that time. And if you're happy to, I'd love to just delve into that kind of like that period, because I think that you articulate it really well on your LinkedIn profile in a really open and honest, as you would do, way. But yeah, just for the audience's perspective, what happened then?
Thanks for asking, Lloyd. I appreciate it, and I appreciate your reflections on it. So it was an incredibly tumultuous time. It's where so many wonderful things came out of, but also some pretty harsh realities and truths happened. So 28 hours before my firstborn, the wonderful Maxie, came along, I was hit by a black cab on my road bike, and it still sends shivers down my spine, really. I could have lost my life, very close to. I had very severe injuries, and off the back of that, of course, a horrendous experience, and my poor wife going through that literally the day before our elective C-section. I had 2 to 3 weeks of wonderful experiences with Max, obviously, as well. He came along, and it was an incredible part, obviously, of my journey, as many parents would know. And I just, of course, was privileged to be alive and privileged to see him and obviously watch this family grow. And so off the back of that intensity, I suppose you could say, where I was managing injuries while looking after the tiny wee human, I really just, I guess I soul searched. I did that classic journey of delving deeper into who I am and what's my purpose. And I truly focused hard on redefining my purpose, or actually just clarifying what it was. in the first place. So I did some really interesting things in terms of uncovering that. We'll go into it a little later. Yeah. But off the back of that, I learned who I am, and that's really driven my decision making ever since in a very clear way. So that's it.
Yeah, it's I remember finding out about that, and anyone who's listening who's gone through that experience of being a first-time parent, those first few days and weeks are, I mean, there's lots of stuff going on, but you do have this kind of, for me anyway, I had a real reflection of kind of, where my life was at that moment in time, and just you have some time, so hopefully get a bit of paternity leave or whatever, and you just have that time to reflect and just consider that juncture. So yeah, I mean, doing that whilst also considering that you just had a serious accident and the potential repercussions. Yeah, I mean, I can understand how that would be. So you said soul searching and finding purpose. That there will be no better time to do that. So thanks for sharing. Moving on, it'd be great if you could just summarize now, before we dive into it in more detail, Braver Leaders. What is Braver Leaders, and what do you do?
Cool. Thanks for asking, Lloyd. So what we do, we're team coaching and leadership development specialists. What does that really mean? We help teams and individuals uncover their true potential and help them refine their performance off the back of that, in its simplest terms. And we do that by using a combination of custom programs where we unlock that learning through research. We do interviews, we do surveys, we help them, I guess, create greater awareness, situational awareness, as well as individual self-awareness through learning a lot more after those surveys are created and information happens. So that's the first part. Off the back of that, we design a program that's there to sort of help drive them forward, and it's developed by themselves. They're continuously feeding back into that process.
And is that, can it be, is it accessed by company or individual or both?
Yeah, so it's predominantly accessed by companies. So a combination of large corporates, but also some startup scale-ups. And it's predominantly focused on leadership teams to start with. Now, that's not because we prioritize them or necessarily only go with them. It's because often we see the greatest impact happen when we make change for leadership groups and teams. And then off the back of that, the wonderful value starts to filter throughout the organization.
Makes sense. Makes complete sense. I interviewed somebody earlier in the year who I know well, Kathy Parker Sawyer. She's an ops. She's a COO who launched a consultancy business where she goes in and helps organizations who don't have a COO to provide the framework that a COO would, and it's built around the idea of company culture and improving the overall business. And she does something very similar, I think, to the survey that you're mentioning, which is she calls it the astonishment report. And what she's found is that, and the whole point of that is to find out what's astonishingly good and what's astonishingly not so good within the business. And what she finds often when going to deal with senior leadership teams and founders of organizations is that they think they have an idea of what the challenges or the issues are, but actually what the report throws up is a whole load of other stuff that they weren't aware of. Totally. Do you have that same experience when you go in?
I'm nodding my head. Obviously, this is a podcast, but I'm sitting here smiling and nodding my head, and got sort of spine tingles in some respects as well, Lloyd. It's exactly what we uncover frequently, obviously, and that's no disrespect or it's no sort of lack of understanding from leaders. Everyone just has their own perceptual filters. They have a different viewpoint of life and their teams and themselves. And that can sometimes skew the way that a leader potentially feels about a team or organization. And also, obviously, a group of people feel about it too. And so those processes, I love that. Like, I love that concept, that label. astonishing. And it's a pleasure to be part of, helping people uncover that. Sometimes it's confronting, highly confronting, but it's an incredibly important part of the process, is to make sure the team and the system is leading the conversation as opposed to an individual is really, really crucial.
Yeah. I definitely know from working with founders and leaders how I imagine for some that those confronting conversations are harder to take than for others. That's for sure. Are there certain things that you see consistently that come out from those surveys, or does it just change every single time, or are there certain things that you see regularly and you think this is something we're used to seeing this?
Great question. We'll take a little moment on that one, Lloyd.
Yeah.
Yes, I would say there's a couple of real consistencies. The first is the one you mentioned, is actually there's often a dissonance between, or a disconnect perhaps, between a leader's perception of what's happening in the room and what is actually happening in the room. So that's the top level. That's the most consistent finding we have. The actual examples are very often around what the purpose of the organization is and the team. Interestingly enough, there's sometimes clarity of a business purpose, but very, very frequently there's less of an understanding of what the team's purpose is. And it's because people don't spend time on that because they maybe don't believe it's, I guess, the top priority at the time. So that's one really important thing that we uncover a lot. And it's crucial because, of course, teams must have an understanding of where they're heading as much as how that's aligned with the business purpose and where that's heading. So that's one big consistency. Secondarily, I think conflict's an interesting one. We uncover very different perspectives and perceptions of how an organization and a team and individuals approach conflict, because ultimately at the end of the day, many different backgrounds, many different people have different ways of conflicting or avoiding conflict. And so that's a huge one we see too. So those are probably the two ones. There's many more, but they're the ones that come to mind.
The conflict point, I know we talked about previously, and we discussed prior to doing this. It was one of the things that I really wanted to delve into, because I've been to and listened to other people who've talked about this before, and they've talked about this in different environments where, in order to create a team that is performing high performance, whatever term you want to use, but is, I guess, achieving what they're truly capable of as a unit, there has to be conflict. But how you get to a point where that conflict is a positive is often the challenge. When you typically go in, do you find that, how is conflict typically addressed, and do you feel it's like one of the biggest areas that they can improve in quickly? Because I can imagine it would be, but maybe I'm wrong.
It's actually the secondary part that we focus on.
Okay.
The primary focus is how you actually get to that conflict and how do you create an environment that helps it thrive. I know that sounds random when you talk about conflict, but there's different forms of conflict. There's, of course, what we call healthy conflict or radical candor. There's lots of wonderful words and phrases for it. But there's also obviously unhealthy conflict, which is where the outcome isn't at the heart of the conversation, and is actually probably most likely heading into more personal elements or less constructive conflict. But actually my point was, how do you get there? And that's the psychological safety, interestingly enough, also a new phrase, psychological security space. I'm actually a big believer in the secondary one. But anyway, the point is how do you build a highly empathetic, a highly compassionate, a highly aware environment that allows people to feel secure in their environment, to challenge each other without any form of repercussion, which is essentially a definition of psychological safe environments. It's not about being warm and cozy per se. It's actually far more about having an environment where you just understand the context of what's happening around you, and you're far more comfortable, or I should say secure, in challenging off the back of that.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, Safety, I've definitely heard that term. Security is not something that I've heard, but it makes a lot of sense. Something, think about how to frame this question. So, what coaching as a concept for businesses, when you go in and have these initial conversations or get introduced, however you approach a new prospect, have they already explored coaching before? Is it something that they are on top of and familiar and they're looking at you as an alternative to something they've already done? Or do you more often see that they haven't actually done coaching, or they think they've done it and they've not done it? There's three questions there, I know, Baz. So try and unpick it. If not, yeah, we can. I can reframe it. But I guess like, what do you see when you're going to speak to a new prospect in their thought process and their relationship historically with what coaching is for their teams? Is a better way to frame the question.
No, I get it. I got you. But thanks for reframing it. It's predominantly two things. They are more often than not very versed in leadership development or people development. And that's a big part of what we do. We balance team coaching and leadership development all the time. It's actually how we get the greatest effect, and I'll walk through that a little later. But so to set the scene, they understand the development space, the needs, the people out there that do wonderful things like us, etc. They'll also understand coaching in an executive form. So a one-to-one coaching. Almost every single person we've talked to understands those two pots or areas or expertise.
Yeah.
Team coaching is far more nascent, so far more early stage. So they'll have less experience generally in that space, and they may have even a little ability to understand more, or even be a little bit sort of walk away from it because they don't understand it, like a natural human tendency. So those three combined, I would say, are very unlikely for an organization to understand all three of them intimately, but the first two for sure. Now, where things get really interesting is like team or group dynamics. Now, that's also an area that most organizations are focused heavily on, but don't necessarily have the answer to. That's an interesting one to delve into.
Yeah. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The next thing I wanted to ask you about was, and we talked about this the other day. I saw a great post from a guy in my network called Todd Jenkins, who's a senior sales leader, and he was making the connection between high performance and what so many people talk about high performance and creating high performance teams. And if you look at certainly the world that we know best, which is that SaaS space, he gave a direct comparison of a football club, and he used Blackburn Rovers as the example. Blackburn Rovers are I should have checked this. They're a Championship or League One football side, but the point is they're not a Premier League football side. Okay, their turnover is £23 million a year as a football club, and they have a whole host of coaches for various parts of the organization, and so and that's all driven towards high performance. And obviously their goal is to get promoted and ultimately to try and get back into the Premier League. And he drew the direct comparison between a 23 million turnover football club and a 23 million turnover software business, which in the realms of software wouldn't be a massive company. Could be a business that maybe only had 100 or 200 employees, but would they have the same attitude towards coaching? And how can you talk about high performance as a business and not recognize that in order to be high performance, you need to have the coaching support and framework around it? When you work with new customers, do you see that disconnect? Do you see that disconnect between, or that narrative between, we are this or we want to be this, and yet we're not really yet at that point? We don't understand the benefits of coaching. We've not really utilized the right resource yet, and there's a breaking down, I guess, of beliefs, because I believe I think that this is one of the biggest areas for potential in team development within software companies. I just think, especially in sales, too often people are brought in as salespeople, and it's like, well, you're a salesperson, there's your target, there's your framework. So let's say we're using Medic or we're using Spin or whatever. It doesn't matter what it is. I've trained you on how to sell our product. I've given you the product knowledge. Now go and do it. But the coaching's missing, right?
Mm.
I too often see that. Like, do you see the same?
I do, yeah. And I think my classically empathetic mindset sets in. And I think, to be honest, people are just, especially in the HR people space often, or the learning space, are just overwhelmed with options. And I think maybe that's why team coaching especially, but also other forms of development and one-to-one are not prioritized, because there's just so much going on. There's so much noise. So I think that's often the case. But I also agree with you. I think there's a less of an investment in what is the most important resource in your whole organization, which is, of course, the people. And it's investment, I mean, within helping them understand who they are, especially as leaders, and then aligning that with the purpose, and then aligning that with, the values, principles, behaviors, a charter, for example, of how they operate, and then the ways they work. I think it's an enormous piece, and it can be overwhelming for people. But I think they maybe aren't delving into the deeper ROI of investing in that full spectrum, which can unlock incredibly profitable organizations and retain great people, basically.
Do you think that the leaders have not? We talked a lot about, or we've touched on purpose a lot, and making sure you have purpose focused. I think, and please tell me if I'm wrong, that a lot of leaders probably just haven't given themselves the time to delve into what really are their purposes, and that could be environment, but it could be outside of their working environment as well, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be confined to that. Do you see that? Do you see that you meet a lot of leaders who, it's not that they don't have purpose, it's just that they've not spent the time and energy, I guess, to really delve into and have that opportunity that you had?
Mm-hmm.
Do you see that a lot?
Yeah, well put. It's exactly what I was going to say about myself. I'm a very good example of that, where I'm actually probably very well versed. I'm well read in this space. I always have been. Or not always, that's a lie. I've been for the last 10 years. And yet I didn't have a clear purpose. So if someone who is passionate about this space hadn't actually defined it, then I'm definitely not surprised, but I'm also completely validating your point around very few of the leaders out there would, and very few of the people we know out there have a decent understanding, a clear understanding of what their purpose is. And then it flows on. They therefore don't have a clear idea of their values and principles and behaviors associated with those values and principles. I just went through the process myself. And this is 3 years after defining my purpose. I had to redo that process very recently. And I just think it shows, to your point, there's often not a lot of time, or people don't make the space is the more important point, because time's immemorial, right? It's the same, doesn't matter what's going on. But of course, it's the space that people create for these practices. And that's the challenge I think people face.
Do you find it's harder or easier for people at different stages of their life to identify and focus on their purpose? And I'll use myself as an example. I think that I found it much easier to connect purpose with with my working life and what I do when I had children. That was an obvious juncture for me. But prior to that, I think I would have struggled to identify what am I doing this for, apart from just personal gain, which is purpose, but it wasn't necessarily the depth that I would have liked. And so since having children, I've been able to reflect on that a little bit more. And I always struggle with the question of, what is your why? What is your why? And now it's just like, I know what it is. Like it's very, very clear. But I definitely struggled pre-children when I was younger as a leader previously in other businesses. If someone had said, "What's your purpose?" No idea, absolutely no idea. Do you find that it's easier or harder, like as you get older?
Interesting. I would say, by the way, side note, I can't wait to hear what your purpose is. If you're happy to share, I'll share mine if you share yours. Because I'm always intrigued on what people's purposes are, of course. But also to answer your question, I'm no expert, obviously, in that space. It's inherently part of what I do, and I'm fascinated by it. But my theory would be that it's a clear juncture in your life. It's in a very significant event that drives this purpose, in my opinion. And it's often the classic human thing of scarcity or urgency. Something comes up and you feel like you need a meaning, you need a sense of being. And your example is your children. Mine was very similar, but a combination of children and an accident. And many others have different forms. It could be a sick parent. It could be very much earlier in your life, you had a significant trauma. You could be, doesn't matter what age really, maybe past, maybe the youth. I'm not sure if you'll be so self-reflective before 13 or 12. I'm sure they are, but not necessarily enough to define your purpose.
Yeah.
But my feelings are it happens after something significant occurs in your life.
Yeah. No, I'd agree with that. I mean, I can only use myself as a reference point, but I would definitely agree with that. When someone goes on the journey of leadership coaching with you as an individual, what can they expect? What do you see when you get further down the line? What do they see? What are the kind of revelations that often come up?
Oh, thanks for asking that question. That makes me excited. I can't wait to get stuck into this one. So,
Good.
At the end, or I guess for us, there's never necessarily an end, but further down the track for them in a program would be a couple of things. Obviously, it's depending on their outcomes, but the predominant sort of general thing will be an energy in the room that has shifted significantly. And what do I mean by that? I guess that's some people would find that a bit woo-woo. I'm sure they do, but actually, what I mean is a group and often a team, ideally, coming together with a far deeper sense of connection and energy. By energy, I mean an ability to connect and therefore drive strategies, actions, values, whatever forward collectively and innately. That's the number one for me. I think I saw that very recently with one of our clients in Dubai. And I just get a huge, huge kick and sense of joy out of watching that happen. It was like this momentum building happened throughout the program. Six modules. In the sixth module, they'd all hugged, they group hugged, they just came together with a far greater intent than I'd seen at the start of the program. And that's, for me, probably the most important outcome.
That's I'm trying to get my head around. I'm trying to get my head around a team group hugging. Yeah. It sounds. I don't. I don't. I can get it. I get it. I definitely see it. It's so funny, isn't it? Because I see that in a sporting sense, having been part of sports teams, how that would be the most natural, normal thing in the world. Yeah, I came from a rugby background. We would hug, embrace, all the time. And yet, in a working scenario, that seems very different. It seems there's a disconnect there for me.
Yeah, and that's that point you made earlier, the transcending of some practices like sport or music, whatever it might be, where there's a lot more connection on a stage or in a room or a playground, whatever, and a lot more human elements coming through in that space, and far less happening in a business context. And how on earth do we not have the same practices happening in business? There's this sort of stayed, sorry, that's a bit of an old word, an old belief that you can't be close to each other in a business setting is, in my opinion, absolutely rubbish. I believe that might not be the same depth as a friendship or maybe even a rugby team, but I believe it
Yeah.
comes far closer, and it's a pleasure to watch it come to light, because at the end of the day, it doesn't just create warm fuzzies. It actually leads back to that point we talked about earlier. It leads back to healthy conflict, which means you're challenging each other appropriately to develop better and faster and stronger. And then you get to innovation. So there's a lot more wonderful things that come off the back of these warm fuzzies, but I'm a warm fuzzy dude, so I like that part.
I love that. I love that. You also at the beginning, I said I'd come back to you. You described yourself as hyper-adventurous.
Hmm.
Tell us more, Baz. Tell us more. What does that mean to you?
I love this, Lloyd. You brought it back, which makes me very excited. You can see I'm hyper almost as excitement. What does it mean to me? I actually, as part of
Yeah.
my work I did on reevaluating and understanding my values, the
Yeah.
top one, interesting enough, that came out of it, the first thing that dropped was adventurous. Now, adventurous means a lot of different things to me or others, but to me personally, it's not just jumping off a mountaintop, or doing skydiving or rafting, or you name it, I'll do it pretty much. Maybe not wingsuiting, that's a bit far, but it's also being adventurous in my career, being adventurous with my children. It's about being adventurous with my own growth, which is one of my values. So I combine those
Yeah.
two often. So yeah, I think for me it means experiencing new things all the time, and just enjoying the small and the big adventures. That's me.
And for a company, let's say that you go into an organization and they are inherently unadventurous, or a team that you just identify very quickly is unadventurous. It's maybe, you know, it could be the industry they're in, it could be the people that work within that team, it could be loads of different things. Um, what, how do you approach that, and what do you see as, if you could say that there's one thing that unadventurous group could would take quite quickly out of being around somebody who is hyper adventurous, what is it?
I have to check myself here, self-awareness, because I worked very hard on self-awareness, both innately and in external self-awareness. I know we could go on for hours about the definitions, but essentially,
Yeah.
how you feel about yourself versus how others feel about your own understanding of yourself. And so I would ideally never impart my need for adventure into a room.
Okay.
And because I need to understand what it means to them first, individually and collectively. And then I would love to unlock it. Obviously, I would love to help them unlock what adventure means to them. It may not be an adventure, to be honest. They may run a mile from that word. And if so, so be it. That's all good. But I would love to see them understand it and then play with that definition in their context.
Makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. I reference when looking into a bit more detail around the approach that braver leaders takes. There was there was clear reference to the outdoors and how the outdoors can be incorporated. How? Give me an example of how you incorporate the outdoors into the coaching that you do. Because I love the outdoors. I'm super passionate about the outdoors. I think that there's so much that can be gained from people spending more time just outdoors. And that's talked about a lot. I know that. It's not new news. But I'm always interested to see how people incorporate that into what they do and what they see.
Cool. Yeah, you hit home with one of my favorite parts of what we do. And it's, once again, it goes back to context. It's about understanding the different forms of outdoors or connection with nature. Often there's a combination: connection with nature, outdoors, sport, joy. They come in different shapes and forms. But actually, like, what we do is, once again, define that and then help them unlock more experiences in the spaces that matter to them, in the context that matters to them. So good examples would be the classics, the one-to-one walking meeting. Like that sometimes is still new for some. Like helping them understand how powerful that could be for the right people. And that's one example. Another extreme is offsites. We would often, once matters to people and the team, help them actually define an offsite that meets that need. They could go to the point where a friend of mine runs an offsite business and he's actually helping them go to Costa Rica to go surfing, for example. Like, what a cool combination of the values and the behaviors that they want to embody and actually doing it in a really freaking cool place, which is adventurous and fun. So yeah, in general, that's what we do, but also importantly, just joy, the joy of being in a great team, because everyone should have more joy and they should understand how powerful that is to unlocking potential.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. Everyone should have more joy. There's a clip there, Baz. There's a clip. There's a clip there. It's true though. It's so true. Yeah, I agree. And the one-to-one kind of walking meeting, I think is I love doing those. I think it's a great idea. I also we worked with a charity the year before last who just supported them, did some charity fundraising for a charity who helped children who came from just really just terrible backgrounds and terrible beginnings to and because of that had all kinds of learning and developmental challenges, and the charity provided them with a essentially like a kind of almost a working farm where you could come away and you could do stuff for the day, part of a course, and just develop some skills that you didn't have. And one of the things that they talked about that I've remembered and I tried to incorporate is they said that in those environments when you are talking to a young person and you're wanting to just engage with them on any level, if you do that in front of each other, looking at each other, that's very difficult for somebody to open up. Yeah, they're not going to do that. And so what they talked about was the washing up chat. So the idea that when people are washing up the dishes, if you think about some of the conversations that you have one person washing, one person drying, but you're typically, most people's sinks are in front of a window. So you're looking out of a window, talking whilst doing something. This is an activity. There's some outdoors coming indoors, and there's less confrontation, or there's no confrontation really because you're not facing each other. And that stuck with me. I just thought it was so interesting that simple moment was a time where they often found that things came out in those conversations that they would never have expected and would never have come out in a one-to-one scenario. So, yeah.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. That's a real nugget, a really gold nugget. I look forward to stealing it if it's all right.
Yeah, absolutely can.
I think it's so special because, to your point, it both creates a great environment for them both in terms of psychologically. It's also they're working in cahoots. They're having to refine things whilst one washes, one dries. They'll have different styles and approaches. That's actually innately what's probably going on as well, is that they are both working together whilst processing information together and sharing ideas and concepts and beliefs in who they are. So I can see the power of that.
There's loads to it. That's the reason why it stuck with me. Baz, before we wrap things up, it's been a great chat. We've covered loads. I know, you referenced earlier on in the conversation that you wanted to understand and for me to share my purpose. That made me immediately think, I'm not sure I can define that. I definitely don't have that as defined in a way that I'm sure you do. But I'm wondering if you might, to help me and help people listening, share your purpose, and then I can share with you my ramblings, which probably won't make any sense, but you can probably help me after. But yeah, we've talked a lot about purpose, and I think that it's look, if I'm honest, it's a phrase and a term that I just wasn't. We talked about children, but I don't even think it was something that was on my radar really. It's just the idea of doing anything with true purpose was not something that I'd really given much thought process to, but that I do more and more so. But yeah, are you happy to share what your purpose is?
I totally am. But first up, I appreciate the vulnerability as well, Lloyd. I called you out and put you on the spot on that one. And also, I just don't think you remonstrate yourself for not knowing exactly what it is. You've got an idea, you play with it, experiment with it, put it out there. I did that for ages. In fact, I only just defined mine probably 100% where I'm happy with it in the last couple of weeks. So I would say
Wow. Okay.
it takes a long time and it's an evolutionary process. So just keep going. And I'm happy to walk through it with you. But mine, get to the point, is about guiding people to unlock and therefore pursue their passions. So that's it. And I think you can probably understand how that plays in, but I'm happy to share more if it's useful.
No, I love it. I absolutely love it. Yeah, yeah, I love it. I think that how I distill this, I need to work through, but I think that what I inherently understand about myself is that I like to I like to help others. I think there's a reason why I'm in recruitment and doing what I do, and that's because I'm most motivated by helping people. I get the biggest buzz by helping people to achieve what they're capable of achieving. And that doesn't matter whether that's being a dad now and helping your children to achieve what they're capable of achieving, or the people who are your employees to achieve what they're capable of achieving, or personally for me to achieve what I'm capable of achieving, or those people, those candidates that I'm working with, to find them an environment and a job and people where they're capable, they can achieve what they're capable of. And I think that's the burning thing I have in my head now, which I've had more and more and more, is just living your life by being able to look back at some point and say, I was capable of doing those things and I went out and I did them, rather than I knew I was capable and I never did it.
Wow.
So, yeah.
I love that, Lloyd.
There we go.
And it shines through in what you do. I can tell you that. I felt that from the day we met, and that's why obviously we worked together. I think it was a big part of it. So thanks for sharing that. Appreciate it. And I think one thing you've already got closer to defining it, but one thing for others listening is think about things like when you go home to your other half, your family, your mates, whatever works for you, what are the things you tell them about? What are the wonderful things you tell them about that you've done in that day, whether work or not? And that'll often help guide you towards a really strong answer.
I love that. Bazz, thank you so much. I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. I just think you're an incredibly positive and wonderful human being. So hopefully everyone gets the chance to watch this. And yeah, I look forward to others connecting with you and seeing the benefit of utilizing your services. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Lloyd. I appreciate it a huge amount. Have a lovely day.